The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mobile Bay as Thomas Mercer stepped off the steamboat. At 28, he had already established himself as a respected journalist for the New York Tribune, sent south to document the expanding port city. His editor's instructions were clear: focus on commerce and development, avoid contentious topics of slavery or politics. "We need stories that sell papers, Mercer, not moral crusades," he'd been told. Mobile in 1849 was a study in contrasts. Elegant mansions with sweeping verandas lined the streets near the harbor, while cramped quarters housed the working poor further inland. The sweet scent of magnolias mixed with the briny smell of the bay and the unmistakable musk of humanity packed too closely together. As Thomas collected his luggage, a thin black man approached. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Samuel. Mrs. Blackwood sent me to fetch you." His voice was quiet, eyes downcast. "Mrs. Blackwood, I believe there's been a mistake. I've arranged accommodations at the Harbor Inn." Samuel shook his head. "No mistake, sir. The inn had water damage last week. Mrs. Blackwood offers rooms to distinguished visitors when the inn cannot accommodate them." Thomas hesitated. He'd heard nothing of this arrangement, but such hospitality wasn't uncommon in southern cities. "And who is Mrs. Blackwood?" "Widow of the late Judge Blackwood, sir. Blackwood House is the finest home in Mobile." The carriage that awaited them confirmed Samuel's claims about the Blackwoods' status. Polished mahogany and brass fittings gleamed in the fading light. As they traveled through the city, Thomas noted details for his article: the bustling docks, the cotton exchange, the market where flesh was sold alongside produce. Blackwood House emerged from behind a curtain of live oaks draped with Spanish moss. The mansion stood 3 stories tall, its white columns reaching skyward like pale fingers. Gardens surrounded it, meticulously maintained despite the September heat. Samuel led Thomas up the broad steps to a door that opened before they reached it. A severe-looking woman in her 50s stood in the entrance, her black dress emphasizing her rigid posture. "Mr. Mercer, welcome to Blackwood House. I am Constance Blackwood." Her grey eyes assessed him coolly, and Thomas felt a strange unease as he stepped across the threshold. The foyer was cooler than the humid evening outside, marble floors gleaming in the lamplight. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. Blackwood, though I wasn't informed of these arrangements. A telegram was sent yesterday. No matter. Your rooms are prepared." She gestured to a young black woman. "Lily will show you upstairs. Dinner is at 7. Samuel will bring your luggage." As Thomas followed Lily up the grand staircase, he noticed portraits lining the walls, stern-faced men and delicate women, all bearing the same sharp cheekbones and grey eyes as his hostess. Only one portrait differed: a dark-haired youth with eyes so deeply blue they seemed to follow Thomas's ascent. The third-floor room was luxurious, yet stifling despite open windows. Thomas moved to one, seeking a breeze, and looked down on the rear gardens. In the gathering dusk, he saw a group of young black boys, perhaps 12 to 16 years old, being led across the lawn by an overseer. Unlike most enslaved people he'd observed in the city, these boys were unusually well-dressed and seemed to be treated with surprising care. "Who are they?" he asked Lily, who was turning down the bed. Her hands froze momentarily. "Mrs. Blackwood's special servants," she whispered, then quickly added, "Dinner bell rings twice, sir," before hurrying from the room. Thomas unpacked his notebooks, his mind already composing descriptions of Mobile's grandeur. Yet as darkness settled over Blackwood House, he couldn't shake the feeling that beneath its elegant facade lay stories far removed from the commercial narrative he'd been sent to write. Thomas descended for dinner precisely at 7, guided by the scent of roasted meat and the soft glow of candlelight. The dining room of Blackwood House was a testament to generations of wealth. Silver gleamed, crystal sparkled, and the mahogany table could easily seat 20, though only 3 places were set. Mrs. Blackwood already occupied the head of the table, and beside her sat a young man Thomas hadn't yet met. He appeared about 20, with the same sharp features as the portraits in the hallway, though his complexion seemed darker, almost sallow in the candlelight. "Mr. Mercer, meet my son, James," Mrs. Blackwood said as Thomas entered. James Blackwood rose and extended his hand. His grip was weak, his palm clammy. "A pleasure, sir. We seldom have northern visitors with genuine literary credentials." Thomas noted the slight tremor in the young man's hand, the feverish brightness in his eyes. "The pleasure is mine. Your mother's hospitality is most appreciated." Two young black boys, perhaps 14 years old, served dinner. Thomas couldn't help noticing their uncommon features. Lighter skin than most of the enslaved people he'd seen, with delicate bone structure reminiscent of the Blackwood lineage. Both moved with unusual grace and appeared better fed and clothed than typical house servants. "You find our hospitality surprising, Mr. Mercer?" Mrs. Blackwood's voice cut through his observations. "Not at all, madam. Southern hospitality is well known, even in New York. Yet you stare at my servants as though they were curiosities." Thomas felt heat rise to his face. "I apologize if my journalistic habit of observation has offended." Mrs. Blackwood waved her hand dismissively. "The Blackwood household has always valued excellence in all things, including our servants. The boys you see have been selected and trained since birth for their intelligence and potential." James coughed into his napkin, a wet, rattling sound. "Mother maintains the finest household in Alabama," he said, voice strained. "Her standards are uncompromising." Throughout the meal, Thomas attempted to steer conversation toward Mobile's development and commerce, topics for his article. Mrs. Blackwood answered with precise, useful information, revealing an unexpected knowledge of shipping routes and cotton prices. "Your understanding of business is impressive, Mrs. Blackwood," Thomas remarked. The late judge had no head for financial matters. Someone had to ensure the Blackwood fortune survived him. Her voice held no emotion. "Now, tell me of New York. Is it true that abolitionists openly spread their poisonous ideas there?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "There are many perspectives represented in New York, as in any city." "A diplomatic answer," she replied, "but evasive. The Blackwoods have maintained our way of life through 5 generations, Mr. Mercer. We understand the necessity of preserving bloodlines and heritage." As she spoke, one of the young servers refilled her wineglass. Her hand brushed his deliberately, lingering longer than propriety would dictate. The boy's face remained impassive, but Thomas noticed a slight tremble in the crystal decanter. "James will show you the library after dinner," Mrs. Blackwood continued. "My late husband collected rare volumes on Southern history and genealogy. You might find material of interest for your article." The meal concluded with a rich pecan tart. As they rose from the table, Thomas noticed James sway slightly, steadying himself against his chair. "Are you unwell, Mr. Blackwood?" Thomas asked. "James suffers from a familial condition," Mrs. Blackwood answered before her son could speak. "It affects the male line. A weakness of the blood, the doctors say." The young man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mother worries excessively. I'm merely tired from the heat." In the library, James showed Thomas leather-bound volumes documenting Mobile's growth from French colony to American port city. But Thomas found his attention repeatedly drawn to the Blackwood family Bible, displayed prominently on a stand near the fireplace. "Your family has an impressive history," Thomas remarked, noticing the careful documentation of births, marriages, and deaths dating back to 1721. James's gaze followed Thomas's to the Bible. "The Blackwood name must continue," he said quietly. "Mother reminds me daily of my duty to produce an heir before—" He trailed off, then added with a strange smile, "But Mother always finds a way to preserve what matters most." Through the open window came the sound of soft singing, young male voices chanting what seemed like a lullaby. James quickly closed the window. "The servant boys have evening prayers," he explained. though the melody had sounded nothing like any hymn Thomas had ever heard. That night, Thomas lay awake in his bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Blackwood House, the creak of old wood settling, the whisper of sea breeze through moss-draped oaks, and distantly the continued sound of those young voices singing well past midnight. Dawn broke over Mobile Bay in streaks of crimson and gold. Thomas had slept poorly, disturbed by strange dreams and the persistent singing that had finally faded around 3 in the morning. He rose early, determined to explore the grounds before breakfast and gather material for his article. The gardens behind Blackwood House were even more impressive in morning light. Formal paths lined with camellias and crepe myrtles, fruit trees heavy with late summer bounty. As Thomas walked, he noticed a separate building some distance from the main house, elegant but smaller, its windows covered with iron grills despite their decorative scrollwork. His journalistic curiosity piqued. Thomas approached the structure. Unlike the slave quarters he'd glimpsed on other properties, rough wooden buildings with minimal comfort, this building had the appearance of a fine guest house, though clearly designed for containment. "It's called the nursery," said a voice behind him. Thomas turned to find Samuel, Mrs. Blackwood's carriage driver, watching him warily. "Forgive me, I was just admiring the architecture," Thomas said. "The nursery, you called it." Samuel glanced around before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where the boys live. Mrs. Blackwood's special ones. The young servers from dinner last night." Samuel nodded. "Them and about 20 others. Different ages. Been that way since before I was born. Why are they kept separately, and why so many boys of similar age and appearance?" Samuel's eyes darted nervously toward the main house. "Mr. Mercer, sir, there are questions that aren't safe to ask in Blackwood House. Mrs. Blackwood has her ways, and those who interfere don't remain to tell of it." Before Thomas could press further, the breakfast bell rang from the main house. Samuel quickly excused himself, leaving Thomas with more questions than answers. At breakfast, Thomas found only Mrs. Blackwood present, James apparently still abed. She wore deep purple this morning, the color of mourning past its initial intensity, but not forgotten. "I hope you found your accommodations comfortable, Mr. Mercer," she said, serving herself from silver chafing dishes that servants had arranged on the sideboard. "Very comfortable, thank you. I took the liberty of walking the grounds this morning. Your gardens are exceptional." She smiled thinly. "The Blackwood Gardens have been featured in publications as far away as London." "Did you venture as far as the rear grounds?" The question seemed casual, but Thomas sensed a trap. "I saw what I believe is called the nursery." Mrs. Blackwood's knife paused over her ham. "Samuel has been chattering, I see. He merely identified the building. I'd be interested to know its purpose, if appropriate for my article." Her grey eyes assessed him coldly. "The nursery is where we raise boys selected for their potential. Judge Blackwood believed that proper cultivation of natural gifts required special attention from earliest age. The results speak for themselves. Our household staff is unmatched in Mobile." "A most progressive approach to servant training," Thomas remarked, choosing his words carefully. "The Blackwoods have always understood that quality must be cultivated across generations, Mr. Mercer, in all things." She sipped her coffee. "I've arranged for you to meet with several prominent businessmen today. Samuel will drive you." As they ate, Thomas noticed a portrait he hadn't seen before, hanging opposite his seat. A striking woman in her 20s, dark-haired like the youth in the stairwell portrait, but with Mrs. Blackwood's grey eyes. "Your daughter?" he asked. "My late sister-in-law, Charlotte. She died in childbirth 20 years ago." Mrs. Blackwood's voice remained even, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. "Her son is the boy in the portrait you were admiring yesterday. I don't believe I've met him. Edward is no longer with us. A tragedy when he was 16. She rose abruptly. "Samuel will be waiting with the carriage. I have household matters to attend to." Throughout the day, Thomas interviewed cotton brokers and shipping agents, gathering the commercial information his editor expected. Yet his mind kept returning to Blackwood House, the segregated nursery, the strange singing, James's mysterious illness, and the carefully maintained bloodline Mrs. Blackwood seemed obsessed with preserving. That evening, returning from his interviews, Thomas directed Samuel to drive past the city cemetery. Among the ornate tombs and monuments, he spotted a large mausoleum bearing the Blackwood name. Despite the September heat, a chill ran through him as he counted the small statues of angels surrounding the main structure. Exactly 23, each slightly different in pose and feature. "How many Blackwood men have died of this blood weakness?" he asked Samuel. The driver kept his eyes fixed on the road. "All of them, sir. None lives past 30. It's why the missus is so fixed on continuing the line." "And the boys in the nursery? What role do they play?" Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mrs. Blackwood believes only certain blood can strengthen the Blackwood line. She selects boys who might carry what's needed." Selects them for what? But Samuel had said all he would, maintaining silence until they reached Blackwood House, where dinner awaited, and with it, more questions than Thomas dared to ask directly. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. James was absent again, reportedly suffering from one of his spells. Mrs. Blackwood presided over the table with rigid formality, the same two boys from the previous night, serving the meal with practiced precision. "I trust your interviews were productive," she said, as the first course was placed before Thomas. "Very much so. Mobile's commercial growth is remarkable. The city flourishes because certain families understand the value of maintaining proper order." Her grey eyes fixed on him. "The Blackwoods have contributed to Mobile's stability for generations." Thomas noted how one of the servers lingered slightly longer than necessary while pouring Mrs. Blackwood's wine. The boy, Thomas now noticed a small birthmark below his right ear, had features that echoed the portraits in the hallway. Mrs. Blackwood's hand again brushed against his, this time with clear intentionality. "This boy," Thomas said, gesturing to the server, "he seems to bear a resemblance to your family portraits." A slight smile curved Mrs. Blackwood's lips. "You have a discerning eye, Mr. Mercer. Isaiah has been selected for special duties in this household because of certain qualities. His parentage, his potential." She dismissed both servers with a wave. Once alone, she continued, "The Blackwood line faces challenges that require unconventional solutions, Mr. Mercer. My husband understood this, as did his father before him. I merely continue their work." "And what work is that exactly?" Mrs. Blackwood studied him for a long moment. "Preservation. The male Blackwoods suffer from a hereditary weakness that has claimed each generation. James will likely not see his 30th year, just as his father didn't." "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there no medical intervention possible?" "Conventional medicine offers no solutions." She sipped her wine. "But there are older remedies, Mr. Mercer. Remedies that require understanding of bloodlines and careful selection." After dinner, Mrs. Blackwood suggested Thomas might enjoy examining Judge Blackwood's private papers for historical context. She led him to a small study adjacent to the library, where ledgers and journals filled several shelves. "My husband documented everything," she said, pulling a leather-bound volume from the shelf. "His grandfather began the practice, understanding that what we undertake spans generations." She opened the ledger to reveal meticulous records of names, dates, and physical characteristics. Thomas realized with growing horror that he was looking at breeding records, not for livestock, but for people. "These are lineages, Mr. Mercer. Judge Blackwood understood that certain bloodlines, when carefully cultivated, could fortify our own." Her voice remained matter-of-fact. "The weakness in the Blackwood men requires specific traits to counterbalance it. We identify boys with these traits early, raise them properly in the nursery, and when they reach appropriate age, introduce selected ones to the family line." Thomas struggled to maintain his composure. "And the boys from dinner? Isaiah?" "Isaiah has the qualities we seek. His grandmother was part of our program, as was his mother. 3 generations of careful selection have produced a boy whose blood may strengthen James's children. should James live long enough to produce them. Her grey eyes held no emotion. If not, Isaiah has other purposes he might serve. The implication hung in the air between them. Thomas had heard whispers of plantation owners fathering children with enslaved women, but this was something far more calculated. A generations-long breeding program designed to produce specific traits. "And if I were to include this information in my article?" Thomas asked, testing her reaction. Mrs. Blackwood's laugh held no humor. "You misunderstand your situation, Mr. Mercer. You're not here by chance. The Blackwoods have friends in New York who identified you as someone who might understand our unique approach to family preservation." "I don't understand." "Your own bloodline, Mr. Mercer. Your maternal grandmother was born in Mobile, was she not? To a family named Devereaux?" Thomas felt his blood run cold. His grandmother had indeed been born in the South before moving north as a young woman, though she rarely spoke of her origins. "How could you possibly know that?" Mrs. Blackwood smiled. "Because Mary Devereaux was born in this house, Mr. Mercer. Her mother was one of our special projects, a girl with exceptional qualities that produced offspring of remarkable vigor. When Mary's unusual coloring made her origins too obvious to keep her here, arrangements were made for her passage north." Thomas gripped the edge of the desk. "You're suggesting my grandmother was a product of the Blackwood lineage?" "Yes. Which makes your blood of particular interest to us." She closed the ledger. "You carry Blackwood blood, Mr. Mercer, without the weakness that plagues our direct male line. Your presence here is no coincidence." As the implications of her words sank in, Thomas heard the now familiar singing begin outside, young male voices in a chant that seemed part lullaby, part invocation. Through the study window, he could see figures moving in the gardens, carrying lanterns toward the nursery building, where a larger light now blazed. "What is happening out there?" he demanded. "Preparation," Mrs. Blackwood replied simply. "James is failing faster than expected. Tonight, we begin the transition rituals that will preserve what matters most." Thomas moved toward the door but found it locked from outside. Mrs. Blackwood appeared unsurprised by his discovery. "You'll join us later, Mr. Mercer, once you've had time to appreciate the honor being offered. The Blackwood blood in your veins calls to its source." As she spoke, Thomas noticed a strange scent filling the room, sweet and cloying. His vision began to blur at the edges. "What have you done?" he gasped, his limbs suddenly heavy. "Just a preparation to make your transition easier," she replied, her voice growing distant. "By morning, you'll understand your place in continuing our bloodline." The last thing Thomas saw before consciousness fled was Mrs. Blackwood opening another ledger, this one with his name already inscribed on a fresh page. Thomas awoke to darkness and the scent of damp earth. His head pounded mercilessly and his mouth felt stuffed with cotton. Gradually, his eyes adjusted to reveal he was no longer in the study, but in a stone-walled chamber, lit only by a single oil lamp that cast grotesque shadows across the floor. This wasn't a bedroom in Blackwood House. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and the air held the unmistakable musty scent of a cellar or crypt. His journalist's mind, even in its fogged state, registered details: a narrow cot where he lay, a small table beside it, a wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Testing his limbs, Thomas found he could move, though his body responded sluggishly. Whatever drug Mrs. Blackwood had administered was still working through his system. He pushed himself upright, fighting a wave of nausea. The table held a ceramic pitcher of water and a note written in elegant script. "Rest, Mr. Mercer. Tonight you will witness what few outsiders have seen, the Blackwood continuation. Your participation is not merely requested, but ordained by blood." Thomas poured water with trembling hands, his mind racing through possible escapes. The door, as expected, was locked from outside. The room had no windows, suggesting he was indeed in a cellar beneath the main house or possibly an outbuilding. As his head cleared, fragments of conversation with Mrs. Blackwood returned. Her claims about his ancestry, the breeding program spanning generations, James's failing health, and some transition ritual scheduled for tonight. Most disturbing was her certainty of his participation, as though his consent were irrelevant against what she called the call of Blackwood blood. A scraping sound outside the door interrupted his thoughts. The heavy lock turned, and the door swung open to reveal Isaiah, the server boy with the birthmark, now dressed in a white linen shirt and trousers that gave him an almost ceremonial appearance. "Mrs. Blackwood requests your presence upstairs, sir," he said, voice flat and emotionless. "Where are we? How long have I been unconscious?" "Beneath the nursery, sir. It's just past midnight." Isaiah held a small lantern that illuminated only their immediate surroundings. As Thomas followed him up narrow stone steps, he caught glimpses of other doors, at least 6, set into the passage walls. "Are there others imprisoned here?" Thomas asked. Isaiah's stride faltered momentarily. "Not imprisoned, sir. Protected. Boys who've shown the gift but aren't ready for transition." "The gift?" The boy didn't answer, continuing up the stairs until they emerged into a corridor Thomas hadn't seen before. Unlike the rough stone below, this hallway was finished with polished wood paneling and illuminated by wall sconces that cast a warm glow over framed documents and small, peculiar objects in glass cases. Locks of hair, small bones, vials of dark liquid. They passed a partially open door through which Thomas glimpsed James Blackwood, lying on an ornate bed, his skin waxy and grey. A physician bent over him, shaking his head gravely, as Mrs. Blackwood stood nearby, her face a mask of determination rather than grief. Isaiah led Thomas to what appeared to be a small chapel at the end of the corridor. Inside, 12 boys from the nursery, all between 14 and 16 years old, stood in a semicircle around a stone altar. Each wore white linen like Isaiah and held a candle. Their faces showed a strange mixture of fear and resignation. Mrs. Blackwood entered moments later, now wearing a gown of deep crimson velvet. Behind her, 2 adult men Thomas hadn't seen before carried a large, ornate chest. "Mr. Mercer, I'm pleased you could join us for this solemn occasion," she said, as though he were a willing guest rather than a prisoner. "What you witnessed tonight has occurred in Blackwood House whenever the direct male line falters." "What exactly is this ceremony?" Thomas demanded, noting that the 2 men had positioned themselves between him and the door. "A transition. James will not survive until dawn." Her voice held no sorrow, only pragmatic acceptance. "But the Blackwood essence must continue. It requires a vessel of our blood. You, Mr. Mercer, and a vessel prepared since birth to receive and nurture it." She gestured to Isaiah. "Our most promising candidate." Thomas looked at the boy, whose face remained impassive though his eyes betrayed fear. "Whatever you're planning, I want no part of it. Your participation was determined before your birth, when Mary Devereux carried Blackwood blood north, Mrs. Blackwood nodded to her assistants. "You need not understand now. The blood remembers what the mind forgets." The men seized Thomas's arms while Mrs. Blackwood opened the ornate chest. From it, she removed a silver chalice and a curved knife with a bone handle yellowed with age. "The Blackwood continuation has preserved our family through pestilence, war, and the weakness of our direct male line," she explained, as though delivering a lecture. "When a Blackwood son fails, we must transfer what matters most, the essence that makes our line exceptional, to a new vessel created through generations of careful selection." The boys began to sing the same haunting melody Thomas had heard on previous nights, their young voices blending in eerie harmony. Mrs. Blackwood approached Isaiah, who knelt before her without hesitation, though Thomas could see his hands trembling. "Isaiah has been prepared since birth for this honor," she continued. "His bloodline was cultivated through 3 generations of selective breeding to produce a boy capable of housing the Blackwood essence." "This is madness," Thomas said, struggling against his captors. "You can't possibly believe—" Belief is unnecessary when faced with 2 centuries of evidence, Mrs. Blackwood cut in sharply. Judge Blackwood was the 7th vessel for the original Augustus Blackwood, who discovered in Haiti the means of transferring a dying man's essence to a new body. Each transition requires blood of the original line, your blood, Mr. Mercer, and a specially prepared vessel like Isaiah. As she spoke, the 2 men forced Thomas toward the altar. He fought against them, but whatever drug lingered in his system had left him weakened. From the corridor came a long, rattling gasp, followed by silence. "James has passed," Mrs. Blackwood announced, showing no emotion. "The transition must begin immediately before the essence disperses." She raised the knife, and Thomas realized with horror that he was about to become an unwilling participant in whatever blood ritual the Blackwoods had been performing for generations. A ritual that would sacrifice Isaiah to preserve what Mrs. Blackwood called the Blackwood essence, which Thomas now understood to mean something far more sinister than family traits or genetic inheritance. The knife in Mrs. Blackwood's hand caught the candlelight as she stepped toward Thomas. The 2 men tightened their grip on his arms, forcing him to his knees beside Isaiah. Thomas could feel the boy trembling next to him, despite his outward composure. "The ritual requires the blood of the line," Mrs. Blackwood explained, her voice taking on the cadence of liturgy. "Freely given or forcibly taken, the blood must flow to sanctify the vessel." Thomas's mind raced. If he could delay, perhaps find a weakness in their plan. "You said my grandmother was part of your program. Prove it." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "You waste precious time. If what you claim is true, you must have records. Show me, and perhaps I'll cooperate." It was a desperate gambit, but something in her expression shifted. With a nod to one of her assistants, she directed, "Bring the Devereux ledger." The man released Thomas's arm and moved to a shelf near the altar, returning with a leather-bound volume similar to those Thomas had seen in the study. Mrs. Blackwood opened it to a marked page, holding it where Thomas could see. There, in faded ink, was his grandmother's name, Mary Devereux, born September 12, 1794, to Elizabeth Devereux, listed as Vessel 17, with exceptional vigor and intelligence. A marginal note indicated her removal to Philadelphia in 1810 due to coloration revealing lineage. "Your blood remembers, Mr. Mercer, even if your mind does not," Mrs. Blackwood said. "Now we proceed." With one guard momentarily distracted by the ledger and the other still holding his arm, Thomas saw his chance. He lunged forward suddenly, knocking the knife from Mrs. Blackwood's hand. It clattered across the floor as chaos erupted in the small chapel. The boys scattered, their candles extinguishing and plunging portions of the room into darkness. Thomas scrambled toward the door, colliding with one of the men. They grappled briefly before Thomas landed a solid punch that sent the man staggering backward. "Stop him!" Mrs. Blackwood commanded, her voice cracking with rarely shown emotion. "The essence disperses with each passing moment." Thomas reached the door, wrenching it open only to find Samuel standing outside, a pained expression on his face. "I can't let you leave, Mr. Mercer," the driver said quietly. "Not now. These people are insane," Thomas hissed. "Whatever they're paying you, it ain't about payment," Samuel replied, glancing over Thomas's shoulder. "It's about surviving. If Mrs. Blackwood doesn't get what she needs tonight, all the boys in the nursery will suffer. Isaiah's just the first choice. There are others." The implication froze Thomas in place, long enough for Mrs. Blackwood's men to seize him again. As they dragged him back toward the altar, Thomas noticed Isaiah had disappeared in the confusion. "Find the boy," Mrs. Blackwood ordered, retrieving her knife. "He cannot have gone far." One man hurried from the room, while the other forced Thomas against the altar. Mrs. Blackwood approached, her earlier composure replaced by desperate intensity. "You will not thwart 2 centuries of the Blackwood continuation," she said, pressing the knife against Thomas's arm. "The essence must have a vessel." Before she could cut, a commotion erupted in the hallway. The missing guard stumbled back into the chapel, blood streaming from a wound on his forehead. "The boys have armed themselves," he gasped. "Isaiah has released those in the lower chambers." Mrs. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "Impossible! They've been conditioned since birth for compliance." A crash from the corridor punctuated her statement. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "They've broken into the main house, ma'am, setting fires in the east wing." Thomas felt the grip on his arms loosen as panic spread. Taking advantage, he wrenched free and shoved Mrs. Blackwood aside, dashing for the door. This time, Samuel stepped back, allowing him to pass. The corridor was filled with smoke, and distant shouting could be heard from the main house. Thomas hesitated, torn between immediate escape and finding Isaiah and the other boys. "Go right, toward the kitchens," Samuel murmured, appearing beside him. "Most of the boys headed that way. They know a path to the bayou where patrols rarely check." "You're helping us now." Samuel's eyes reflected the distant flames. "Been waiting 15 years for a chance like this. My own son's in the nursery. Tonight ends it one way or another." Thomas followed Samuel's directions, navigating smoke-filled passages until he reached the kitchens. A group of white-clad boys huddled there, Isaiah among them. "Mr. Mercer!" The boy's eyes widened. "We thought you were part of it." "I'm as much a prisoner as you," Thomas replied, counting at least 10 boys. "Samuel says you know a way to the bayou?" Isaiah nodded. "Through the old drainage tunnel. We can reach a fishing camp before dawn." As the group prepared to flee, Thomas noticed 3 boys carrying small wooden boxes. "What are those?" "Proof," Isaiah said grimly. "The ledgers showing what they've done, which boys were born to, which women, who was sold away, who disappeared, records going back to Haiti in the 1700s. The implications staggered Thomas. Evidence not just of the Blackwoods' bizarre rituals, but of a systematic breeding program spanning generations, a story far beyond what his editor had sent him to cover, yet one that demanded to be told. From the main house came Mrs. Blackwood's voice, shrill with fury, ordering servants to find the escaped boys. The fire was spreading, illuminating the night sky with an orange glow. "We need to go now," Thomas urged, leading the boys toward the concealed tunnel entrance Isaiah indicated. As they slipped away from Blackwood House, Thomas looked back one last time. Flames now engulfed the east wing where he'd been staying. In a third-floor window, he glimpsed a figure in crimson, Mrs. Blackwood, watching her domain burn, the Blackwood legacy crumbling before her eyes. The ancient ritual would find no new vessel tonight. Whatever essence the Blackwoods had preserved through generations of exploitation would disperse with James's final breath, if it had ever existed at all. Thomas turned away, following the boys into darkness that promised eventual dawn, and with it, a story that would shake Mobile to its foundations, if he found the courage to tell it. Dawn broke over Mobile Bay as Thomas and the boys emerged from the cypress swamp. They had traveled through the night, navigating the drainage tunnel to the bayou, then following waterways inland to avoid the patrol boats that would surely be searching for them. Exhaustion etched lines in every face, but the distant glow of Blackwood House burning provided grim satisfaction. The fishing camp Isaiah had mentioned belonged to a free black man named Moses, who greeted their bedraggled group with caution that turned to concern when Samuel explained their situation. "Blackwood House," Moses said, shaking his head. "Been whispers about that place long as I can remember. Boys going in, never coming out, or coming out changed." "Changed how?" Thomas asked as Moses' wife distributed cornbread and coffee. The old fisherman exchanged glances with Samuel. Sometimes a boy would return to his mama after years in that place, but wasn't the same boy. Eyes different, way of speaking different, like something else wearing his skin. A chill ran through Thomas despite the morning heat. "You believe there was truth to the ritual? The transference?" "Don't know about truth," Moses replied, "but I know 4 generations of Blackwoods all acted the same way, spoke the same way, even though they was supposed to be father to son. And I know boys who went in gentle came out cruel, if they came out at all." As the younger boys rested, Thomas examined the ledgers Isaiah had salvaged. The meticulous records confirmed everything Mrs. Blackwood had claimed and worse. Detailed accounts of vessels, selected for specific bloodline qualities, births recorded with clinical precision, notes on which boys showed receptivity to essence transference. One entry caught Thomas's eye, a reference to his grandmother that mentioned partial transference achieved with female vessel, creating enhanced offspring with bloodline vigor, but without full consciousness transfer. The implication that the Blackwoods had attempted their ritual with a female vessel with partial success made him shudder. Isaiah joined him, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Now you understand why we had to escape tonight. James's death meant one of us would become the next vessel." He nearly choked on the word. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked. "Moses has connections with people who help runaways north. Most of the younger boys will go that route." Isaiah's fingers traced the birthmark below his ear. "I want to make sure these records reach people who can expose what happened there. Will you help us, Mr. Mercer?" Thomas considered his position. As a northern journalist, he had protection his companions lacked, but publishing such a story would risk not just his career but potentially his life. "The story needs to be told," he said finally, "but we need more than these records. We need witnesses willing to testify and evidence that can't be dismissed as abolitionist propaganda." Samuel, who had been listening nearby, spoke up. "There's a judge in New Orleans, name of Laurent. His sister disappeared after being sold to Blackwood House 30 years ago. He's been looking for evidence against them ever since. A Southern judge willing to hear this case? He's Creole with French connections. Not popular with families like the Blackwoods, but respected in New Orleans courts." Samuel's expression hardened. "And he lost family to whatever happens in that house. He'll listen." Thomas made his decision. "We'll need to separate. The boys should continue north with Moses's contacts. Isaiah, Samuel, and I will take the records to New Orleans." He turned to the oldest boy. "Are you willing to testify about what you witnessed? It will be dangerous." Isaiah straightened his shoulders. "I've prepared my whole life for a ceremony I never understood. I've watched boys disappear into that house never to return. I've heard the screams from the chambers beneath the nursery." His voice strengthened with each word. "Yes, Mr. Mercer, I will testify." By mid-morning they had established a plan. Moses would arrange passage for the younger boys on a series of fishing boats that would eventually connect them with the underground network supporting escaped slaves. Thomas, Samuel, and Isaiah would travel to New Orleans via a different route, avoiding main roads and steamboats where they might be recognized. As they prepared to part ways, Thomas penned a brief, coded message to his editor in New York, explaining his delayed return and hinting at a story far more significant than Mobile's commercial development. Whether the Tribune would publish what he ultimately wrote remained uncertain, but the truth of Blackwood House would be documented regardless. A boy of about 12 approached Thomas as they packed supplies. "Sir, will they come after us?" Thomas wished he could offer reassurance, but honesty compelled him to admit, "Mrs. Blackwood will not surrender 2 centuries of the Blackwood legacy without a fight. The fire may have destroyed much, but if she survived, she'll rebuild." "She always finds a way," Isaiah added quietly. "That's what she told each new boy brought to the nursery. The Blackwood line always finds a way." Moses returned from scouting downriver, his expression grave. "Boats coming up from Mobile, searching the bayou already." Thomas looked at the gathered boys, their faces showing varying degrees of fear and determination. The ledgers in his pack contained evidence of generations of atrocity, but getting that evidence to someone who could use it just became more urgent and more dangerous. "We need to move now," he said. "Separate paths as planned. If captured, remember, you know nothing of New Orleans or Judge Laurent. As the groups prepared to depart in different directions, Thomas caught a glimpse of smoke still rising from the direction of Blackwood House. The fire had not consumed everything, it seemed. Like the secrets it contained, parts of the mansion had endured, and somewhere, perhaps, so had Constance Blackwood, with generations of terrible knowledge and the determination to preserve her family's essence at any cost. Thomas turned away from the smoke and toward the uncertain path ahead, the ledgers heavy in his pack, the truth heavier still on his conscience. The journey to New Orleans took 4 days of cautious travel. Thomas, Samuel, and Isaiah moved primarily at night, avoiding main roads and settlements where news from Mobile might have preceded them. By day, they hid in abandoned structures or dense swampland, taking turns standing watch. Reports from passing travelers confirmed that Blackwood House had burned significantly, but not completely. More disturbing were rumors that Mrs. Blackwood had survived and offered substantial rewards for the return of her stolen property, with specific descriptions of Isaiah and several other boys. "She's named you as well, Mr. Mercer," Samuel reported after listening to gossip at a rural crossroads. "Claims you're a northern abolitionist who incited her slaves to rebellion and arson." Thomas grimaced. "Not surprising. She's trying to frame this as a political act rather than an escape from something far worse." "Will your newspaper stand behind you?" Isaiah asked. "Truthfully, I don't know. My editor sent me to write about commerce, not expose generations of atrocity." Thomas managed a weak smile. "But I have friends at more radical publications who will print the truth, with or without the Tribune's backing." On the evening of the 4th day, they reached the outskirts of New Orleans. The city presented new dangers. More officials who might recognize them from posted notices, but also crowds where they might pass unnoticed if properly disguised. Samuel had contacts in the city's free black community who provided shelter in a small home behind a cooper's shop. There, they received clean clothes, food, and crucial information about Judge Laurent's movements. "The judge holds court Monday through Thursday," explained their host, a dignified woman named Marie who claimed distant kinship with Samuel. "Fridays he sees private petitioners at his home on Burgundy Street. That's your best chance to speak with him away from those who might report to Blackwood allies." "Will he see us without introduction?" Thomas asked. Marie exchanged glances with Samuel. "I can provide that. My late husband once did service for the judge's family. But you must understand, Laurent walks a difficult line. He has power, yes, but also enemies who would gladly see him ruined for challenging certain institutions." "We're asking him to confront one of the oldest families in Alabama," Thomas acknowledged. "The risk isn't small." "No," Marie agreed, "but neither is his hatred for those who took his sister." The next morning, Thomas examined the ledgers again, organizing the most compelling evidence. The Blackwood records documented not just the breeding program, but financial transactions, bribes to officials, and chilling clinical notes about the transition rituals dating back to the 1790s. Most disturbing were the entries tracking essence transfers, 7 complete cycles in which a dying Blackwood's essence supposedly transferred to a new, younger body. Isaiah watched silently as Thomas worked. Finally he asked, "Do you believe it, the essence transfer?" Thomas looked up, weighing his response carefully. "I believe the Blackwoods believed it. Whether they actually transferred consciousness or merely conducted elaborate rituals that brainwashed young boys into adopting the mannerisms of their captors." He shrugged. "Does it matter?" "The atrocity remains either way." "It matters to me," Isaiah said quietly. "I was to be the 8th vessel. I need to know what might have happened." Before Thomas could respond, Samuel entered with news. "Marie has arranged an audience with Judge Laurent tomorrow evening. We're to come after dusk, through the service entrance." Thomas nodded. "Then we have tonight to prepare our case." They spent hours organizing their testimony and evidence, anticipating questions and objections. Isaiah practiced recounting what he had witnessed in the nursery, and beneath it, the conditioning of boys, the disappearances, the chambers where preparation took place. Remember, Thomas cautioned, we need the judge to see this as a criminal matter, not merely a political one. Focus on specific violations of existing law, kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy. And if he asks about the ritual itself? Samuel questioned. Thomas considered this. We present the evidence as we found it. The ledgers document their beliefs and actions. Whether the judge accepts the possibility of consciousness transfer is less important than establishing the crimes committed in pursuit of it. The next evening, Marie led them through back streets to Judge Laurent's residence, a handsome townhouse in the French Quarter. As promised, they entered through a service door into a kitchen where an elderly black woman assessed them with shrewd eyes before wordlessly guiding them upstairs to a book-lined study. Judge Antoine Laurent cut an imposing figure despite his 60-some years. Tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair, he possessed the bearing of a man accustomed to authority, yet marked by personal tragedy. His piercing gaze examined each of them in turn before settling on Thomas. "Mrs. Devereux tells me you bring evidence concerning Blackwood House," he said, his accent revealing his Creole origins. "I should inform you that rumors of the fire and subsequent escape have reached New Orleans already. Constance Blackwood has friends in this city." "We're aware of the risk, Your Honor," Thomas replied, "but what we've uncovered cannot remain hidden." Over the next hour they presented their evidence, Isaiah's first-hand testimony of life in the nursery, Samuel's knowledge of disappearances and strange behavior among returned boys, and finally the damning contents of the ledgers themselves. Judge Laurent's expression remained impassive throughout, though his hands whitened around a quill pen when they referenced his sister's likely fate as one of the early vessels in the program. When they finished, silence hung heavily in the study. Finally, the judge spoke. "What you describe would constitute the most extensive criminal conspiracy I have encountered in 30 years of law. If even half is proven true, the implications extend far beyond Blackwood House, to families throughout the South who may have participated or benefited." "We understand the scope, Your Honor," Thomas said. "But the evidence is compelling but also fantastical," Laurent interrupted. "Claims of consciousness transfer, generations-long breeding programs, rituals derived from Haitian practices. Many will dismiss this as abolitionist fantasy or sensationalist journalism." Isaiah stepped forward. "I lived it, sir. It was no fantasy." The judge studied him for a long moment. "I believe you, young man, but belief is insufficient in a court of law." He rose and moved to a cabinet, from which he withdrew a miniature portrait. "This was my sister Josephine at 16. She was sold to Judge Blackwood in 1818, supposedly as a house servant. The portrait showed a striking young woman with features reminiscent of the judge himself. I never saw her again," Laurent continued. "But in 1830, I encountered a Blackwood cousin in New Orleans who commented that I reminded him of a boy at Blackwood House, a boy with my sister's eyes." His voice hardened. "I have spent decades seeking legal means to investigate that house. Your evidence provides the opportunity I have waited for." Hope surged through Thomas. "Then you'll help us." "I will examine these records thoroughly and prepare legal documents for a formal investigation," the judge confirmed. "But you must understand, this will not be quick, nor without significant danger. Constance Blackwood will use every resource to discredit or silence you." "We're prepared for that," Thomas assured him. Judge Laurent shook his head slightly. "I think not, Mr. Mercer. You cannot comprehend the depth of her resources or the extent of her connections. What you witnessed was merely one house, one family's implementation of practices that may extend throughout certain circles in the South." The implication sent a chill through the room. If Blackwood House represented just one instance of such practices, how many other such operations might exist? "What do you suggest then?" Samuel asked. "Patience and caution," the judge replied. I need time to build a legal case that cannot be easily dismissed. Meanwhile, you three must remain hidden, particularly Isaiah, whose testimony will prove most crucial." He turned to Thomas. "As for you, Mr. Mercer, your northern newspaper connections may provide the best protection, but also present the greatest threat to our case. A sensationalist article now would alert those involved, and likely result in evidence being destroyed before legal action can commence." Thomas understood the dilemma. His journalistic instinct pushed him to publish immediately, yet doing so might undermine the larger goal of bringing the Blackwoods to justice. "How long would you need?" he asked. 3 months minimum, possibly 6. The judge raised a hand to forestall objection. "I know it seems excessive, but building an unassailable legal case against a family like the Blackwoods cannot be rushed." As Thomas weighed this advice, a sharp knock at the study door interrupted them. The elderly housekeeper entered, her expression tense. "Visitors below, Judge. Mrs. Blackwood and her associates have come calling, most insistent to speak with you on urgent business." The 4 men exchanged alarmed glances. Somehow, Constance Blackwood had traced them to New Orleans, and to Judge Laurent himself. Their momentary safety had already been compromised, and with it, perhaps their only chance of exposing the truth of Blackwood House to the world. "The service stairs," Judge Laurent said immediately, gesturing toward a concealed door behind a bookcase. "Marie will show you to the carriage house. Wait there until I can assess the situation." As they hurried toward the hidden exit, the judge gripped Thomas's arm. "Leave the ledgers," he whispered. "If you're captured with them, all is lost. I'll keep them secure." Thomas hesitated only briefly before surrendering the precious records. The elderly housekeeper ushered them through the narrow passage and down steep stairs that led to the kitchen and out a rear door to the courtyard beyond. The carriage house stood dark at the property's edge, offering temporary shelter as voices drifted from the main house. Through a small window, Thomas glimpsed figures in the judge's parlour and felt his blood freeze at the sight of Constance Blackwood, still dressed in mourning but now with bandages visible on one arm, likely from the fire. "She tracked us," Samuel whispered. "But how?" Isaiah's face had gone pale. "The birthmark," he said, touching the spot below his ear. "She always said it marked me as special." "What if—" "A physical description would be sufficient," Thomas reassured him, though uncertainty gnawed at him. The speed and precision with which Mrs. Blackwood had located them suggested resources beyond what he'd imagined. They waited in tense silence for nearly an hour before the kitchen door opened again. Instead of the judge or Marie, a young serving girl slipped into the carriage house. "The judge says you must leave immediately," she whispered. "They have papers, official documents claiming the boy is stolen property, and you, sir," she nodded to Thomas, "are wanted for incitement to insurrection. They're demanding the house be searched." "Can the judge refuse?" Thomas asked. The girl shook her head, not without raising suspicion. "He's stalling, but says to tell you 3 things. First, he has secured what you brought. Second, a boat called Josephine's Revenge leaves for St. Louis tonight from the North Docks. Third, he will contact you through the Tribune in exactly 8 weeks. With that, she pressed a small pouch of coins into Samuel's hand and disappeared back toward the kitchen. "North Docks," Samuel muttered. "That's nearly a mile through heavily patrolled streets." Thomas quickly assessed their options. "We'll need to separate again. 3 men traveling together, 1 white, 2 black, will attract attention. I'll create a diversion near the front of the house while you 2 make for the docks." "And if you're caught?" Isaiah asked. "As a northern journalist, I have protections neither of you can claim. Even with the charges, they'll likely send me north for trial rather than risk northern newspapers reporting a white journalist held in southern jails." Thomas wasn't entirely convinced of this himself, but the alternative, all 3 captured, was unthinkable. After brief, fierce debate, they agreed to the plan. Thomas would exit through a side gate, circle to the front of Laurent's house, and create a commotion sufficient to draw attention from Mrs. Blackwood's men. Meanwhile, Samuel and Isaiah would slip out the rear and make their way to the docks by a circuitous route. 8 weeks, Thomas reminded them as they prepared to separate. Look for word from Judge Laurent through the Tribune. If I can't be there myself, I'll have a colleague meet you. Minutes later, Thomas emerged onto Burgundy Street, straightening his coat and attempting to project the confidence of a man with legitimate business. He circled the block, noting at least 3 men watching the judge's house, clearly Mrs. Blackwood's associates. Taking a deep breath, Thomas adopted the gait and volume of an intoxicated gentleman, staggering up the street, singing a popular northern tune at the top of his lungs. As expected, heads turned, including those of Mrs. Blackwood's watchers. "Good evening, fine gentlemen," Thomas bellowed, intentionally drawing nearer to the judge's front entrance. "Might I inquire if this is the residence of Judge Laurent? I have urgent business from New York." The distraction worked immediately. 2 of the watchers moved toward him, hands moving to weapons concealed beneath their coats. Thomas continued his performance, weaving dramatically and nearly colliding with one man. "Sir, you need to move along," the man growled, pushing Thomas away from the house. "But my business is most urgent," Thomas protested loudly, "concerning certain properties in Alabama." That got their full attention. The front door of Laurent's house opened, and Thomas found himself staring directly at Constance Blackwood, her grey eyes widening in recognition and fury. "Seize him!" she commanded. "That's Mercer!" Thomas abandoned all pretense and ran, knowing he had accomplished his goal, drawing all attention to himself and away from the carriage house where Samuel and Isaiah would now be making their escape. He managed half a block before one of the men tackled him from behind. As he struggled against increasingly brutal restraint, Thomas caught a glimpse of 2 figures slipping from Judge Laurent's rear garden into an alleyway, Samuel and Isaiah, making their bid for freedom. Thomas ceased resistance, allowing himself to be dragged back to the judge's entrance where Mrs. Blackwood stood, rage contorting her usually composed features. "Where are they, Mr. Mercer?" she demanded. "Where is my property?" "Gone beyond your reach," Thomas replied, tasting blood from his split lip. Judge Laurent appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral despite the chaos. "Mrs. Blackwood, I must protest this violence on my property. If you have legitimate legal claims against this man, there are proper procedures. This man has stolen valuable property and incited arson that has cost me dearly," she replied. "I have warrants for his arrest from Alabama authorities." "Which have no jurisdiction in Louisiana," the judge reminded her. "If you wish to press charges here, you must apply to the local magistrate." The legalistic debate gave Thomas hope. If Laurent could maintain this obstruction long enough, Samuel and Isaiah might reach the boat. Mrs. Blackwood's patience visibly thinned. "Search the house," she ordered her men. "You have no authority to search a judge's residence without proper documentation," Laurent objected, blocking the doorway. "I suggest you take Mr. Mercer to the proper authorities if you believe he has committed crimes." For a moment, Thomas thought Mrs. Blackwood might order her men to force their way past the judge. Instead, she smiled coldly. "Very well. We shall do this properly." She turned to her associates. "Take Mr. Mercer to the city jail, present the Alabama warrants and my sworn statement regarding his crimes against my property." As rough hands hauled Thomas to his feet, Mrs. Blackwood stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "Did you really think you could escape the Blackwood legacy so easily? The blood knows, Mr. Mercer. It always knows." Thomas was dragged away from Judge Laurent's house, his last glimpse of the judge revealing a man whose expression conveyed both regret and determination. Whether the ledgers would remain secure, whether Samuel and Isaiah would reach the boat, whether the truth of Blackwood House would ever come to light, all now hung in precarious balance. As he was forced into a waiting carriage, Thomas calculated the time. If Samuel and Isaiah moved quickly, they might reach the docks before Mrs. Blackwood thought to send men there. And if Judge Laurent meant to honor his promise, in 8 weeks' time, the story might still emerge. with or without Thomas Mercer's direct involvement. The carriage door slammed shut, and darkness enveloped him as they rumbled toward the city jail, where Constance Blackwood's influence would determine whether justice or the terrible legacy of Blackwood House would prevail. From the New York Tribune, December 18, 1849. Special report, The Blackwood Affair by James Morrison, special correspondent. The disappearance of Tribune journalist Thomas Mercer while on assignment in Mobile, Alabama, has been resolved with both shocking revelations and tragic consequences. For the past 11 weeks, this paper has reported on the mysterious circumstances surrounding Mercer's vanishing after allegations of incitement and property destruction were leveled against him by prominent Alabama widow Constance Blackwood. Today, we can report the full truth behind these events, substantiated by sworn testimonies and documented evidence now in the possession of federal authorities. Thomas Mercer did not incite insurrection or destroy property as alleged. Rather, he uncovered a generations-long criminal conspiracy centered at Blackwood House, a conspiracy involving kidnapping, false imprisonment, and systematic abuse under the guise of preserving a family bloodline. Records dating to the 1790s, authenticated by multiple experts, reveal the Blackwood family engaged in selective breeding of enslaved people to produce boys with specific traits, who were then subjected to bizarre rituals when male Blackwoods neared death. These rituals, based on corrupted Haitian practices, allegedly transferred the essence of dying Blackwoods to carefully selected boys. Testimony from Isaiah Johnson, now safely in Philadelphia and recognized as a free man of color, corroborates the documentary evidence. Johnson escaped Blackwood House during the fire that partially destroyed the mansion in September, bringing with him ledgers documenting the family's activities across 7 generations. New Orleans Judge Antoine Laurent, whose own sister disappeared into Blackwood House in 1818, has provided sworn statements regarding the evidence presented to him and Constance Blackwood's attempts to recapture Johnson and silence Mercer. As for Thomas Mercer himself, we regret to report that he died on October 14th while in custody at the New Orleans City Jail. Official records claim yellow fever as the cause, though physicians who examined him noted unusual symptoms and unexpected acceleration of the disease. Before his death, Mercer managed to smuggle out a final statement, which reached this office last week. In it, he detailed his discoveries at Blackwood House and expressed his belief that his own distant connection to the Blackwood bloodline, through his maternal grandmother, made him a target beyond simply silencing a witness. Federal authorities have now taken possession of the Blackwood records and launched investigations into similar practices that may extend beyond this single family. Constance Blackwood herself vanished shortly after Mercer's death, her whereabouts currently unknown, though unconfirmed reports place her in Haiti or Cuba. The Blackwood estate in Mobile has been placed under government control pending completion of these investigations. Several prominent Southern families implicated in the records have issued vehement denials, while others have quietly disposed of properties and relocated to territories beyond U.S. jurisdiction. Isaiah Johnson, speaking from the safety of a Pennsylvania Quaker community, told this reporter, "What happened at Blackwood House wasn't just about slavery, though that evil underlay everything. It was about believing some blood carries power that can cheat death itself. Whether the rituals worked as they believed doesn't matter. The atrocities committed in their name were real enough." This newspaper recognizes the courage of Thomas Mercer, who sacrificed his life to expose these crimes, and of Isaiah Johnson and Samuel Taylor, whose testimony provided crucial corroboration. The Tribune has established a fund in Mercer's name to support continued investigation into such abuses. As this story develops, we remain committed to publishing the truth, however disturbing, in service to justice and human dignity. Editor's note: this concludes our special report on the Blackwood affair. Regular reporting on Southern commercial developments will resume in next week's edition. From the Personal Journal of Isaiah Johnson, dated July 15, 1850, Philadelphia. I dreamed of Thomas Mercer again last night. In the dream, he sat across from me in Judge Laurent's study, just as he did that night in New Orleans. But his eyes were wrong somehow, colder, more calculating, with a grey cast that reminded me of Mrs. Blackwood. Samuel says these dreams will fade with time, that they're merely my mind processing all we witnessed. Perhaps he's right. The investigation continues to expand. Judge Laurent's letters mention 3 more families now under scrutiny, with similar records discovered on estates in Mississippi and Georgia. The pattern was wider than even we suspected. What troubles me most aren't the reports of Mrs. Blackwood's disappearance, but the rumors that followed. A woman matching her description was seen boarding a ship bound for Haiti, accompanied by a young journalist whose manner and speech reminded witnesses of Thomas Mercer, though he moved with the stiffness of recent illness. Of course, this is impossible. I attended Mercer's funeral myself, saw his body laid to rest in New Orleans soil. And yet the birthmark below my ear sometimes burns, as if in warning when I consider these reports. The Blackwood ledgers contained one detail I never shared with authorities or the Tribune. A passage describing how partial essence transfer could occur through prolonged exposure to Blackwood blood, even without the full ritual. The passage claimed such transfers created a beacon that could guide the consciousness across vast distances, seeking completion. Thomas carried Blackwood blood through his grandmother. In those final weeks in the New Orleans jail, was he truly alone? Or did something of Constance Blackwood, or whatever ancient consciousness the Blackwoods believed they preserved, reach out to claim its distant scion? I will likely never know. My new life in Philadelphia keeps me occupied with more immediate concerns. The Quakers have arranged education and employment that I never dreamed possible at Blackwood House. Still, I keep a bag packed, ready for swift departure. Some nights, when the wind blows from the south, I swear I hear those same ceremonial songs we sang in the nursery, and I imagine grey eyes watching from shadows, waiting for blood to call to blood across the miles between us. The Blackwood legacy may not be finished. The essence, whatever it truly was, may still seek a vessel. And somewhere, perhaps, Constance Blackwood continues her family's work, preserving what she believes matters most, even if it wears the face of the man who sought to expose her.